ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Deep Thoughts on today's CERN Large Hadron Collider, or LHC. Now, some of you have been waiting for this for a while. A lot of us are curious about CERN. I didn't want to just rush in and do an episode and kind of freestyle about it, because I wanted to kind of get it, different perspectives of the whole CERN Collider argument. Now, a lot of people just say CERN, and we're all talking about the Collider. But just to split hairs for a second, CERN is an organization who is in charge of building this collider. So you're really talking about the Large Hadron Collider. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So why talk about it? It was just some science class here? No. We'll get into a little bit of the science here. But this is because the collider is very enigmatic, right? It is hidden. Its purpose is visibly ridiculous on one outward level. It seems as if they're hiding something underneath, unless this is the most flawed scientific group of people on planet Earth, which I have to give all the scientists the benefit of the doubt, but maybe it is easy to bring together 4,000 of the most indoctrinated, dogma-filled scientists on planet Earth to agree on building something in the ground, with another 6,000 people helping to build the thing and support it. Then there's the other side of the camp, which is a bunch of people worried about what damages could be done by running such a machine. You have the scientific community, such as I believe, Neil deGrasse Tyson. We're not a gigantic fan of on the show. Your Stephen W. Hawking's, and I think those are the two main ones. They've come out and said, you got to be very careful turning this thing on, because you have the physicists have no idea what's going to happen, and we shouldn't play with the subatomic fabric of the universe unless we know what the hell we're doing. I think those are fair warnings. And, sadly, of course, each time that they turn it on, each time that they complete an experiment and don't end the universe, their hubris and their arrogance to continue aimlessly and almost blindly continuing to play with the sweater that is the fabric of the universe, they are just ebbing closer and closer to a potential disaster. And that's just a scientific observation. We're going to get into the organization itself. We're going to get into the product that is the collider. We're going to get into the social fabric of those who built it, at least the external people that we know. And we're just going to get real on the types of personalities that we're talking about here. And then we're going to try to make sense of a lot of the accusations that they are using this collider to rip a hole between our dimension and another dimension to allow in a bunch of darkness. There's going to be a lot of overlap between my God episode and this one. The lunacy of scientific atheists and the lunacy of absolutely indoctrinated religious people. It's almost like, they have the wheel of sanity, right? On one end you have full-blown genius, down to average sanity, up to complete insanity, right? And I think that you have your ultra scientists and your ultra religious people. They live at the snake eating its tail moment of complete insanity and brilliance all at the same time. And unfortunately, they're the most active doers in the universe that we experience, right? Our planet Earth. And so we tend to be run by that little Rubicon between insanity and genius. And it's, quite frankly, it's going to remain there, because your sort of middle tier of the circle of life in an intellectual capacity are a bunch of lazy bums, a bunch of sheep who are just looking to punch their ticket just to get their socialistic payout and go home. They're not inventors, they're the fanboys of the world, right? So let's get into CERN. CERN, the organization, was founded in 1954. Ironically, the Bilderbergs were founded in 1954. I just thought that was interesting. But CERN is an organization that has overseen several incredible things in time. It's hard to say if CERN didn't exist, if these things that CERN has overseen wouldn't have come into fruition anyway, Like the guy who created Vice Scripts, I think worked for, I forgot who you helped. It was like Sears and Roebuck or something like that. And he used their machines to create it, their metal to create it, but he owned the idea and patented it off to the side. This organization said, see, we invented the Vice Grips. It's like, no, the guy invented the Vice Grips. And they took him to court and said, we own the whole thing. And the judge said, yes, you own this pair of Vice Grips, but he owns the idea. So in court, he had to give him the first pair of Vice Grips ever made. I thought that was kind of funny. But CERN's biggest accomplishment is the internet as we know it today. Now, the internet was created again by the military government in the 50s and 60s. By 1963, it was turned on, but it was very text-based, very crude. No sooner did Ivan Sutherland or whatever his name is created the first pixel on screen, did we start transmitting data between computers. And then in the late 60s, about 69, the U.S. government pushed it on the back of the educational institutions so that they could pay for all the hardware, and the government knew that for every single military base in existence, minus maybe 51 in S4, there's a university close by. And so they said, we'll push this on the back of the educational system, and we'll just tap into it. And that's what they did. So they don't have to pay the bill anymore, at least like they used to. And again, universities benefited from it greatly, so that's how it kind of transferred over. But in the late 80s, early 90s, you have a guy who pioneers a protocol for transmitting text that within it has all the instructions put together a web page, which is essentially text that tells it how to lay out, and text that says, go get this image, go get this piece of music, go get this video, and any other type of element that needs to be embedded in the page, and then the web browser assembles it all together. And that's why when you type in a web URL, you have http://. You're typing in the protocol that is the protocol that your browser uses. Now, hopefully you don't have to type that anymore. You can just type the domain, you realize it'll work. So for those of you who want to hate CERN, you can see me because of CERN. You can hear me because of CERN. So you do have some well-intended folks within this organization. Now you have this huge collider. They tried to build a collider in Texas. So CERN would have been built in Texas had Texas, the state, not pulled out their, we can't see past our church steeple, and shut it down because they couldn't figure out what it was for. And maybe they did the right thing for themselves. But when that was shut down in Texas, and I remember this as a kid, it went drastically over budget, and it was going to be a big suck on the state itself, but it was so being subsidized too by a lot of other organizations. They decided to build this thing on the coast of France and Switzerland. So they designed a brand new one, and I believe that the design phase and the build-out phase was about a 10-year period. They turned it on in 2005, but I think they really started constructing this thing around 1998, just sort of, getting all the designs together. It had a price tag of $10 billion, right? The biggest machine in human history is the Hadron Collider of CERN. The biggest machine in the world. It's massive, right? We're going to get into it and how it's built. But this thing is built. It's 100 meters underground. So this thing is way underground. Now, some of you are completely new to this thing, and you're like, what the hell is the machine? What does it do? I heard it's a particle collider, but what the hell is that? Well, what they do, and of course, I'm going to give you the abridged version because even I don't have any clue about exactly how they accomplish what I can read and understand that they're accomplishing. But what they want to do is take mass, a single proton, and smash it into another proton. And they know that when these two particles collide at amazing speeds, that they're going to have the subatomic matter, the stuff that thing is made out of, blast into a million pieces. And for any of you who've seen a video online of two cars having a head-on collision and you see the thousands of parts that fly off a car, then you should understand the collider. When those collisions occur, there is an amazing amount of energy that comes off of those collisions. Now, some people might think of a collision like a car, and if you go to a car accident, or even let's just say we have a county fair, someone's built a contraption to take two empty cars and slam them together. The layman thinks, okay, I know what I'm going to find. I'm going to find a piece of a mirror, a piece of a chair, a piece of a car, right? That's how you find slow-moving energy, mass as we call it, right? When it comes to a collider, you're not finding little tiny pieces of mass as you think of it in a car collision, right? What they are finding, let's put it this way, is frequencies of energy. And they use something called the Sigma 5 methodology of statistical analysis to figure out whether or not something actually exists as a stationary object with a certain frequency, or whether or not they're seeing a frequency of energy that is merely passing through a velocity of decay due to the collision. Okay, you might be like, what the hell did you just say? Okay. Imagine you go back to your car crash thing. Now you're going to study the mirror piece. I'm going to say to you, I know ahead of time this mirror is going to come off, and it's going to come off in a million pieces as soon as these two cars hit each other. Now you know that after the car hits and everything settles down, 10 minutes later you can find the mirror piece somewhere off to the side of the crash, right? But now what if we took the whole crash and we started analyzing it on a frequency level? As soon as the frequency and wave force energy, right? So all the forces that are colliding, you can't see them, but you can see what the effect of the forces of the two cars crunching in on each other, right? Well, imagine the mirror piece is coming off the mirror, and the distance between where it was and where it actually ends up. You're looking at all that force that knocked it off the side of the car. Now, when you are studying nothing but force and energy and frequencies of mass, instead of hard objects like our car crash, you could mistake the force of the mirror coming apart. This is a very crude analogy, but you'll get it, I think, in the end. You could mistake that force as a particle unto itself. It would almost appear as if particles started to exist the second that the mirror pops off its mount and starts, starting becoming a fragment flying to its destination in the sand somewhere. So they use this statistical analysis of all of the frequency data of the collision to figure out, is this a temporary force that is not actually a particle, or is it the actual particle itself that we're sensing? And so they plot it on a bar graph. I mean, not a bar graph, like a line graph with a bell in it, right? And they look for these horrendous surges in electricity to figure out, that's a particle, and everything else is just chaotic static, which is a kind of the arbitrary forces of things flying around. It's very, very brilliant, okay? I had a really interesting experience I just want to share right away, because we're going to get into the bowels of what this thing is actually trying to do, just by sheer lunacy of sort of the loyalties of the scientists going into the CERN Collider project to begin with. They are towing dogma, which has been utterly flushed. And, there's a slight chance in hell that someone spent $10 billion towing crappy dogma forward and trying to prove crappy dogma one more time so that a bunch of old men don't have to redo their theories. Right. But there's a chance that that's the outward story, that the society who's been sold that dogma is, yay, we're going to go after Big Bang theories and dark matter theories. Two theories that have been, dark matter has been created to button up the problem of how ridiculous the Big Bang is. We're going to have to go into Big Bang one more time on this show to prove, just very simply, for those of you who have no physics background, I can prove to you in a second that it can't exist, that it would never occurred. Right. When I hear the scientists that are leading this thing toe that in, it just blows my mind. So some of you might remember the Genome Project from the late 80s, early 90s. That project was to sequence all of the DNA inside of a chromosome. All the nucleic acid combinations, right? And supposedly after we do that, we're going to understand how to keep man healthy. And there's definitely been some benefits to that, but it was really harvesting a bunch of nucleic acid patterns so that the pharmaceutical companies of the world that do designer drugs can actually patent part of the human genome, which is ridiculous, right? Now, the whole thing was bunk, and they knew it was bunk because they had essentially overlooked, I don't know if intentionally or out of pure ignorance, what a chromosome's made out of, right? A chromosome is 50% protein patterns, 50% DNA. Your protein patterns are the schematic of how to build a bookshelf. Your DNA is all the pieces and parts that are in the bookshelf box, right? So there's only one piece of paper that says how to make it a bookshelf, right? Now, we are made of very few parts, right? The nucleic acid alphabetic combinations are infinite, and I mean, they're infinite, but they are vast, right? But the individual letters that we're built out of, which would be the individual Legos that we're built out of, are very similar to a housefly, to an earthworm, so on and so forth. But our protein patterns, the schematics of how to put that together, are vastly more complicated than anything else that we've run into, besides higher order animals, right? So you take CERN. CERN is founded by, as far as I can tell, 4,000 hardcore physicists, 10,000 employees total. So you have 6,000 that are just there to essentially engineer the actual antenna, or the collider itself. They built this thing with massive bias, and you may not think that's a bad thing, but you have tons of scientists who are going to be taking the data that comes out of CERN, because once a collision occurs, the idea is that all of the data that is being collected by these huge collider, they're 5-story high, gigantic machines that actually feel all of the frequencies that come out of the collisions. And they broadcast that into a massive array of hundreds of CPUs and then broadcast that out to the world. And all these different universities use their mini computers, supercomputers, to analyze the data. So a bunch of scientists who have been theorizing physics for a really long time. Some of them have been doing it for 50 years. Some have been doing it for 30 years. Some have been doing it for 20 years. Some are 15 years, right? From Stanford University to Princeton to all over the world. They want to prove a lot of their hypothesis, their PhD paperwork, right? Just like Hawking, who wrote down the theory of the Big Bang, right? They're all going in trying to mulch this data to prove their theories. Now, no one can blame anyone for trying to prove their theory, especially if they've hung on to it for 30 years. But as some of the scientists have said, if they're at the 30-year mark, they're trying to prove theories that they had come up with 20 years later after a 10-year, stint of trying to create a theory. For any of you who know anything about physics, or the cosmology or subatomic physics, the amount of theories, the new theories that come about to re-engineer old theories and old thinking in 20 years. It used to be in the 70s and 80s, as early as the 70s and 80s, everything that you thought that was going on 20 years earlier had 4 or 5 other counter theories that were pushing out your old theories. But now we have a collider in 2016 trying to prove theories that were locked down in ice in the 1960s. And so the amount of bias to ignore conflicting information and simply cherry pick the information that will prove your theory is massive, because their egos are involved. Okay? And again, you sort of can't blame them for being human in that area, but when it comes to science, it's extremely dangerous to propagate this stuff a little bit further. And I don't think it's extremely dangerous in that the collider could cause a gigantic problem, right? But it's not dangerous in the sense, it's not as dangerous to say a professor will continue teaching a bad theory in college. All that does is stunt the growth of everyone who goes to the colleges who work for these folks that are very biased in their theories, right? I personally, I'm 46 years old. I can't imagine a single thought I've had at 26 that I would just stomp my foot on the ground and say, this is still true. This is exactly how the world works, and da-da-da-da-da. I'm a completely different human being than I was when I was 26. My theories of everything in life have utterly transformed. So the idea that a scientist could hang on to their theories for 20, 30, 40 years blows my mind, right? So let's quickly go through the construction of the collider. The collider is three sets of circles. They graduate the particles up in velocity, okay? This is as I understand it. If I'm wrong, I'll annotate the video on YouTube for those of you coming through audio. You have essentially an electromagnetic railgun, if you will. It's not the same exact technology, but it's the same sort of theory that you have these gigantic magnets, which are these beautifully constructed. It looks to me like they're 15 to 20 feet long a piece. I never looked up the exact length, but they look massive. And they have a tremendously beautiful and accurate, precise configuration of magnets inside to carry energy through them in one polarity, right? Or actually what's going to happen is they're going to put, when they connect all these things together, they're going to have one running by the other. So they have this amazing modulation that's going on, right? I'm not quite exactly sure how they pull this off. And I'm not sure this is public information. Who knows? But they string a bunch of these things together in a really small circle to sort of get the initial impacts, or initial frequencies going. And then once it reaches a minimum amount of speed on the frequency, they graduate up to another ring, which is about, what looks to me about twice the size. It looks like an order of magnitude of at least 2 up. That one spins it until the point it gets to a certain minimum or maximum velocity, and then it spins it up to the big one. Now, CERN is 17 miles around. It goes underneath 2 country borders. Once this thing has reached a minimum amount of speed, and there are low speed collisions and high speed collisions. It took them several years to get to the high speed collisions. Once these things are up there, there are 4 major areas where they're going to collide these beams together. And what they're doing is essentially adjusting the frequency of the beams such that they don't hit each other as they're getting accelerated. And then once they reach the proper speed of collision, they're trying to collide these things out. They reduce, or they change. They don't reduce, but they change the frequency such that the 2 beams collide. And what we're talking about in terms of colliding and the amount of accuracy that we're talking about here is 2 protons smacking each other in the face, right? It would be easier for you and I to sit across from this patio, me having a grain of sand in this hand and you having a grain of sand in that hand, and we're 20 feet away from each other. It would be easier for you and I to throw those 2 pieces of sand at each other and collide somewhere in the middle than it is for them to do what they're doing. And yet they pull it off. Through magnetism and extreme control on these frequencies, right? The amount of precision is mind-blowing. That they're able to harness a beam of electricity and hold it into place such that it can slam into another beam coming the other way. And I'm not sure if what they're doing is sending, obviously, maybe trillions of these things, and they're just looking for the first ones to smack, but it is pitched as a single proton hitting a single proton. I think if you had too much of this stuff, maybe you would have so much chaotic energy, you might create a bomb, or you might create so much data you couldn't sift through it. Even the Sigma 5 technique of finding particles may not work, right? But there's 4 major collision points on the big ring. Now, if you look at the CERN collider, you just have these beautiful tubes, which are full of liquid helium, right, to cool it all the way down with these magnets inside. And it's just a tunnel. It's just you've seen it, you've all seen it if you've looked it up. But it's when it pops out into the collision points, you have the gigantic, mind-blowing 5-story high, essentially sensors, the collider sensors. And I don't know how long they are, but it's just so massive the mind has a problem understanding. Now, most of you can look at a 5-story building, it doesn't blow your mind. But when you're talking about a 5-story computer, essentially with massive sensors in it, all handmade, right? And it's made in these donut discs, right? So they build one flat disc that's 5 stories high, and I don't know how thick it is. probably several feet thick, and they just keep putting these on, almost like when you have barbells and you put the weights on the end, right? So they stack up this gigantic collider, and then they attach it all together. And what's happening is, as soon as these protons collide, it's obviously throwing massive energy in a bunch of different vectors at a bunch of different frequencies, right? Spiraling out of the original impact. And as I understand it, these sensors are there to simply capture the vector of the energy going through these plates, right? So they can sense probably a disturbance in a frequency that's very solid. They can probably just say this sensor has no power going through it, so if any power goes through it, they can sense it came in at this point, and by putting another sensor right next to it, right? Chronologically, you have an impact, and the first sensor impacts the second sensor, and you get essentially a vector. But you can also study its energy at the point of impact. This starts to reveal particles within this gigantic collider apparatus, right? So there's 4 major sensors. Now there's 8 experiments going on, but the big 4 are known as CMS, LHCb, Atlas, and Alice. Okay, there's a couple more, which is like LHC4, Totem, and like it's MOEDAL or something like that. I didn't study the other ones, but so let's review the 4 major ones, right? And this is where it gets into the conspiracies, okay? So a lot of people have an issue with it. These claims that they're looking for, people don't know what it's trying to do, and so they hear these crazy theories, and of course they can make some sense out of stuff. We're going to get into the logo and all that conspiratorial stuff, but I need to lay the foundation of this whole thing. Atlas is the one really looking for extra dimensions, signs of new laws of physics, anything that's going to be utterly chaotic and out of the book of their incredible bias they put on this machine and the incredible bias they put on the data to find the God particle and that kind of stuff, right? That's where Atlas is geared at. That's just a rough summation, right? It has 2 massive detectors built into it, right? CMS is sort of a general purpose thing that it's a bit like the Atlas, but it's hunting for the Higgs boson God particle, clues to that, and of course, dark matter, the nature of dark matter. So automatically you have bullshit in that CMS situation, right? Looking for something that's ridiculous. Alice is studying the fluid form of matter. It is sort of some of the subatomic particles that deal with plasma energy. So these quark gluon particles that deal with giving plasma its ability to form and unform. In terms of everything that I've researched, plasma is sort of your stem cell of energy, which is why it's so alluring, But again, Alice is also geared at looking at, at quark gluons as it relates to the Big Bang. So anybody in the Alice side of things, right, looking for the Big Bang stuff, has completely wasted their time. If their bias is going to strictly say the data that we're analyzing is trying to go back to the Big Bang Theory, you don't need a $10 billion collider to understand how ridiculous the Big Bang is. But let's get to LHCb, and I'll tell you about the Big Bang here real quick, okay? So LHCb is another giant Big Bang charter, which is essentially looking for missing antimatter. It's looking for dark matter in general. Okay. So again, you have 4 collision points, and the only one that seems to be really going for something that's real is Atlas, which is essentially anything that reveals new physics that aren't being taught in schools, right? It's searching for extra dimensions. And this is their official story, right? They are searching for signs of extra dimensional stuff. And they're actually oddly enough, and what do I want to say? To their credit, they're willing to look at string theory again, and this is where Atlas comes in. And again, if you're from CERN, if you're from the Collider Project, and you're watching this and you're pissed off at my summations, then just publish more information about what the hell you're doing, because there's no way for any of us to get any more information out of the system, right? let's do a Big Bang recap here real quick, okay? And if you're the scientists that are dealing with this thing and you're coming in with your, I'm so offended you're saying the Big Bang didn't happen, or you're feeling superior to me because of the Big Bang theory has been your entire life, brace yourself, okay? Because we're going to knock this down in a way that a 5-year-old could understand it. And I'll give it to you in 2 pieces, all right? For those of you who study Joseph Campbell, and Joseph Campbell was one of the greatest researchers of the philosophy and development of mankind's thinking as it relates to parables in mankind. One of the first things he ever, put it this way, one of the theories of the beginning of the universe that he found in both Africa and South America, as I've heard it in his lectures online. You can watch Joseph Campbell's lectures for hours online. You could buy his books. I got his books and I've watched his lectures, right? He was a big part of Star Wars. You know, he wrote the whole archetype of Star Wars, which was also Seventh Samurai and a few other things. But one of the earliest stories of the beginning of man, and it doesn't mean that this isn't true, it's just highly unlikely, okay, was that God was a sleeping being. And when God awoke, God exploded. And then the story diverts into 2 different takes. When God exploded, he blew up. And he became all the stars, the planets, and the life on the planets. The second telling of the story is that the stars and the planets were actually already there. And when God exploded, his mass became us, which is why we're made in his image. But both stories, the original story of mankind, has a Big Bang in it. And all Stephen W. Hawking did was retell that story in a physics wrapper such that the whole universe can be described in a nutshell. Now, if you think about the from to requirements of understanding the universe, right? You're talking about man barely understanding his navel. And of course, the next thing that man can understand in the terms of these arrogant physicists, okay, these sociopathic physicists who have been made sociopaths because they're treated badly on the planet Earth, right? Because they're different, because they think left brain on a level that's unbelievable, and hopefully the theorists think right brain as well. But we go all the way to the beginning of everything. And of course, we understand the beginning of everything. So just on a philosophical standpoint, we have old tales of the beginning of mankind that match exactly the Big Bang. And some of you might go, well, that's God telling you how the world worked. God gave us the answers and all they're doing is showing you it in physics. Okay, I'll let you finish your life with those thoughts, right? But what is the theory of the Big Bang? The theory of the Big Bang is that because there's gravity, of course at some point everything's going to pull in on itself. It's not going to be able, very slowly the whole universe will finish expanding and it will eventually stop itself through its laws of attraction, and eventually it'll all come back together and it will go down into a singularity because gravity will be so unbelievable. Okay, and you have to adopt theories of gravity, which is that mass actually exchanges mass with mass. That's the only way the Big Bang can occur. For those of us who believe it's ethereal winds pushing on things and creating negative pockets between mass, you can't have a Big Bang with the ethereal mass model. Faraday and Tesla proved that ether exists. Physicists came in and threw it out the door, which is how they can get to this Big Bang theory in the first place. But you have to believe that gravity is essentially all mass exchanging some sort of atomic mass between each other, and that creates some ridiculous level of attraction, which is why nobody in the physics world claims to know what gravity is. But those in the electromagnetism world who believe in ether, who have proven ether exists, says it's very simple. It's the negative space between 2 objects. Okay, well, let's just go with their theory. Everything is compressing down out of some magical force that we don't understand, right? We don't know what gravity is, but we know gravity made this Big Bang, right? So we'll just ignore the fact we have no forces that actually account for this, other than we know gravity exists. We don't know how it works, but of course it would make this happen. But a singularity, in the eyes of a physicist, is a single point that at the same time it has all mass in it, all energy that has ever been created in the universe. Created from what? We don't know, right? Created from nowhere, right? Or it's just an is. It has no mass, but all things are in that spot. Now, In order to have the discussion about the Big Bang, you have to actually take that singularity and you have to give it some mass in your mind. You have to give it a space. Even though they're going to say it has no space, which is, again, more paradoxical, ridiculous, make-up physics, right? Physics utterly breaks down the closer we get to the moment of the bang itself, right? Physics does not support the idea of the Big Bang, which is, and their only button on that is saying, well, we're still trying to figure it out. Eventually we will figure out all this missing physics, and then the Big Bang will be completely, from start to finish, from every microsecond up, will completely explain the Big Bang, right? But at some point, that singularity has to be viewed as some sort of cue ball in space. You can make it infinitely small in your brain if you want to torture yourself, but it does have a certain amount of displacement in the universe, right? If we're going to go with all their crazy ideas or their lack of science, right? But this cue ball would have everything in it that ever existed ever. And at the moment of the Big Bang, it would be the most unified, beautiful object that's ever been created in existence, right? It's going to be symmetrical in all ways. There's not going to be a wart on one side. There's not going to be an air bubble inside. So if you take the singularity and theoretically cut it down the center, the left side is going to match the right side. If you cut it down the center like an equator, the top hemisphere is going to match the bottom hemisphere. You're going to have an absolutely even supersymmetry, we'll get into this, a totally symmetrical object in space. Regardless if you want to measure it as having no mass or mass, it's going to be the most beautiful thing ever made. Now, and at some point, in the theory, it never explodes on the way down to this singularity, right? There's never any popping or booming. It has so much gravity, it just holds it all in place. And at some point, at the singularity point, it magically loses its ability to hold itself together and it explodes. Again, completely fictitious, theoretical crap on paper that completely defies all physics that we know today. And I don't care what division in science you're in, there's nothing that supports the Big Bang's theory all the way down to the moment of the Big Bang. But again, we're going to use their theory against them. When this thing explodes, you're going to have the most mathematical, perfect distribution of mass in the universe that could exist. Meaning, as it explodes and distributes this mass around the universe, the left side of the universe is going to look exactly like the right side of the universe, as far as the top to the bottom, any way you want to slice it. It's going to be unified in its distribution. Is that what we see when we look into space? Do we see a completely unified universe? Hell no. I don't care if you believe the Earth is flat. You still don't see that crap in the sky. Right? Not that flat Earth people believe in Big Bangs, but sticking with the heliocentric model of the universe, it is absolutely as chaotic as could be. Now, let's bring in Stephen Wolfram. Right? Stephen Wolfram wrote a book that's all about patterns. The patterns as they relate to the chaotic nature of life. What did he discover? He discovered and proved beyond the shadow of a doubt in his mathematical models and computers that having infinite chaos doesn't create life in all cases. That if you have too few chaotic particles, you create patterns that just look like mathematical tapestries, right? They immediately start repeating like crazy. And then if you have too many particles, it also happens. He figured out, that a very small group of particles, like 3 to 4 random particles, creates organic life patterns that never repeat. Sort of what we see in reality. So a perfectly distributed universe is never going to create life patterns. It never will. You need chaos in the universe, completely unsymmetrical existence to have life. The idea that there's a discipline in physics that's supersymmetry blows my mind that anyone would say supersymmetry and life have anything to do with each other. If it is supersymmetry, you can't have life. If you have chaos, multiverse stuff, you can have life. We're going to get into what those mean in just a second here. So hopefully that just makes sense to you right away. You look into space and you see it as a chaotic cloud of stars. Can't be a Big Bang. There could never be a Big Bang. Just to see what we see out there, it can't exist. So automatically, if you use basic logic, you cannot walk into any school of thought in physics towing in the Big Bang Theory, which is why the leading cosmologists on planet Earth who aren't getting the accolades from these schools aren't towing it anymore. But it's so popular, right? It makes your grandma feel good about how the universe was created. The problem with scientific people, in most cases, is you get a overwhelming 95+% group of these scientists who have only gotten accolades because they memorize and repeat stuff. And then you have a tiny fraction of a percent, actually probably more than a fraction, but probably less than 5% of physicists in the world actually have the right brain cleverness to create new theories that actually take into account what's really going on in their observable universe. You know, Stephen Hawking didn't think the Big Bang Theory through very far because of this idea of a completely perfect singularity turning into absolute chaos. The only way you could possibly do that is to say that not everything was in the Big Bang, and as it expanded and bumped into a bunch of stuff in the universe, that perfect distribution of stuff bumped into a bunch of things and made the chaos that's out there. But I think we just need to let go of ridiculous theories. Okay? Things could simply be ises. It could just be, you know. Let's get into some of the science of what they're looking for with their bias. There's something called the standard model of mass, of matter, right? And that is that they are trying to figure out, and I salute them 100% on this. They believe that to create a unified theory of the universe, that the Big Bang has to be there. Because it seems so clean, right? Of course, it's a clean moment. It puts that uncertainty of chaos that they carry in their chests, right? Because, again, a left-brain person who's memorizing and repeating to get their bachelor's, their graduates, and their PhD, and to go on and write papers to make a bunch of other left-brain people who lack creativity to feel good, chaos is the worst thing for them. And then you have some theoretical scientists that live in the chaos theories, right? The multiverse theories. And they feel more comfortable in accepting reality for the way it appears to us, which is completely chaotic and random, right? There's a ton of science behind this, and you should look this up if this fascinates you. But the standard model theory of mass is that you have a centralized, up to a point of CERN, a centralized God particle that holds together as almost a piece of centralized nucleus of glue. It holds together all other classifications of energy, you know? And again, I don't want you to really think of mass as particles, like that piece of mirror on the car during the collision, right? I want you to think of everything as being made of the very same thing. It's all forces of frequency of energy, right? Frequencies of energy, when moving in a particular trajectory and a particular velocity, and when it holds that position, when it holds that particular form of measurable energy, for whatever reason, we classify those as various particles in the universe, right? So an electron cloud behaves in a different frequency that we call the electron cloud. A proton and a neutron have their distinct frequencies and energies, which is what the Hadron Collider understands beautifully, right? The Hadron Collider is measuring all of these frequencies and trajectories to find new particles. They completely understand that, right? But the one thing they weren't able to find in their theory of the standard model of mass is that they have this, they sort of have this beautiful symmetry particle where for every proton, they have a, I think it's a spoton. You know, they take all the particles that we understand and they create these antiparticles, which they put an S on the front of all the other names. And so they have this balanced symmetry thing. Again, it's just to make you feel good looking at it on a piece of paper. It's crazy, right? But they're trying to say, you know, equal and opposite reactions. So they try to make this model of matter adding antimatter in their mind to kind of explain theoretically on paper the forces that would combat any other force, right? But this guy, Higgs, came up with a theory of the God particle. And what blows my mind is that this guy actually got to patent an idea that I think is absurdly obvious to every single person who's ever conceived of the fabric of the universe, that there is a unified particle that holds it all together. But for some reason, this guy, I guess, wrote a paper and it was, he's the first guy to think of it. No, hundreds of years before Higgs ever existed, everybody was looking for the single particle that held the universe together. They just didn't write it down. But anyway, we give the name to this guy. He shed a tear when they said they found it, right? So hats off to that guy. I'm not trying to piss on his parade. But the subatomic mass that they're searching for is measured in something called GeVs. It's a capital G, lowercase e, capital V. And it's giga electron volts. It's like 1 billion volts. So billion, it's going to be a frequency measured in these GeVs. So it's going to wiggle 1 billion times to create 1 GeV. Now the theorists separated into 2 camps. And there's I believe the larger camp, which is studying the standard model of mass. And then you have a smaller group of folks studying what's called multiversing. Multiversing opens up the frequency range to theorize parallel universes on top of each other. And there's an analogy out there that's called booking. And and again, anytime something feels really comfy, it's okay to think about it in a comfy little analogy, but they're not trying to say this is exactly how it's put together. It's just to help your mind figure it out. But if they have these theories of, vibrational forms of existence, that mass can actually exist in an infinitely dense thing. Look at my time travel episode. Look at my first episode on the fundamentals of the universe to hear my theories that might help your thinking if this is starting to blow your mind a little bit. But they talk about it being a bound book, and that we are simply relegated to our piece of paper, which is not a finite plane, which would probably be an infinite plane, right? But in other pages right next to our page are universes that are closer to us, and then as you up the frequency, just like turning the dial on your radio, right? You go from 99 FM all the way up to 106 FM, and there's a lot of bands in between. Technically speaking, there's infinite bands in between. Well, they're trying to say that there's, for the booking multiverse people, that there's a bunch of different planes on each other, and that if the God particle came in at a particular GeV, it's going to lend itself greatly to a multiverse situation, a chaotic situation that then can hold within its bowels multiple universes. The supersymmetry model requires a different frequency, which is comforting to physicists because it'll make the God particle extremely stable, which then gives us a lot more faith in how the universe is going to hold together in its current form. Now, what's interesting is that physicists actually believe that the universe, after CERN did what it did, they now worry that that the God particle is too unstable to really hold the universe together. That any moment now it can actually just undo itself and the whole universe can unwind and explode. Again, why these guys get themselves so dramatically vested, I don't understand. Again, it's just equations on paper, dude, and most of it's built on dogma like the Big Bang, okay? I'm bouncing around a little bit so you guys don't get completely bored of everything, but hopefully this is very educational for you. When they did their first collision, it's a low speed collision, all right? In, I believe, 2012. That's when they said they found the Higgs particle. Now everybody wanted to know the data. What GeV rating was the God particle, the Higgs boson particle? Your multiverse people believe that it should come in at 140 GeVs. Your supersymmetry guys wanted it down to 115 GeVs. Now, this is where you get into sort of the moon hoax sort of thing, where you have spent $10 billion building this collider in the ground. And the ridiculous notion, which the scientists understand completely, is that I think one of the analogies I heard was that it would be like somebody, like the press sitting around Edison, one of the female physicists who worked on the I think the Atlas Collider, maybe she was the Atlas Collider, but she made this great analogy. She said, look, it's like the press sitting over Edison going, come on, make the light bulb, come on, make it turn on, right? He's got 10,000 iterations he's got to get to before it'll work properly, but they're pressuring him. So the pressure on CERN is a little bit absurd, but they have to, for the sake of the people who funded this thing, come up with results. So what I'm about to tell you seems fake to me, all right? So again, a bunch of physicists want 115, a bunch of them want 140. What happens? They find the Higgs particle directly in between at about 125.5 GeVs. This doesn't give a slam dunk to either side of the equation. This lets both groups sort of have a kind of a non-win situation, right? It's not multiverse, it's not symmetry. It's somewhere in the middle. Now, immediately the physicists who want to believe in symmetry are freaked out that this thing is too unstable. What does that mean? It just means that they believe that the Higgs particle could change its state at any point in time in the history of the existence of the universe, and therefore the fabric of the universe itself would undo, and everything that we know as the universe would disappear. Now, quite frankly, it's one of these situations where if we are strictly made out of mass and energy and there's no consciousness, which we beat up on this show, I believe in there's a consciousness, that we would simply cease to exist and we wouldn't be around to worry about it. So don't worry about the universe ending. If it ends, we won't know it, right? It won't be this nothingness cloud coming in like the never-ending story where we get to see our perilous ending approach us. It'll just cease to exist. It'll probably be instantaneous if that were to happen. But I think the whole thing is ludicrous to begin with, so don't worry about it, right? I typically only mention dark matter for a split second. Let's loop back for just a quick second to put a button on the Big Bang Theory, because again, these physicists are coming in with these huge biases to push together old freaking fossilized ideas into the future. Dark matter was something that they invented on paper because Big Bang didn't account for the mass that we actually see in the universe we're looking at. Now, I think we're talking about lunacy feeding lunacy. So I think that the argument, and the reason why I don't go too deep into dark matter is because I think that the entire thing is bunk for the reasons I just gave you earlier, right? But when they said to themselves, we don't have enough mass to account for the distribution of mass that we see in the universe, the forces that need to occur, they started creating this thing called dark matter. Dark matter is essentially them saying that there's a bunch of mass out there that helped the Big Bang actually do what it needed to do, but that it just sort of dissipated out of the visual spectrum of man. And so we need to go out and find it, right? Now, what they have done cleverly, just like climate change wants to claim that even when it's cold, it's global warming. The climate change is the new name to basically make sure that any anomaly in the world weather patterns is the same thing, right? What they've done with dark matter is essentially arbitrarily dial in the visual spectrum of mass and energy in the universe and simply said, there it is right there. It's like they took the radio dial, and say our ears could only hear, 90 FM to 95 FM, but we know that there's infinite ranges of radio that we can't hear. And they built a machine to listen to all the other spectrums and said, see, you can hear the static from those other realms, and that's why this stuff exists. They're always going to win the argument of dark matter because it's an arbitrary construct on its face, right? They have arbitrarily picked frequencies in space and said that's dark matter. So you see it, Now, consequently, there's some interesting, I think, short-sightedness when they studied the dark matter distribution in space. They realized that it looked like Earth was not moving through the universe because as they look at the dark matter distribution from the photographs, it's aligned to the pole of the 23-degree pole of Earth, and it's also aligned to the equator of Earth. And I think it's called the Michelson experiment, which basically has never been solved for to this day, other than they said that the machine that the guy built warps with the use of energy, and therefore this alignment is all an illusion, right? Let me propose something that I've never heard attached to the Michelson theory, which is why I think that the physicists see this alignment in the dark matter around Earth. Okay. Light and energy bends around other energy, right? So when we look at dark matter in space, the reason why the Michelson experiment gives the illusion that we're holding still in space is because we have a gravity lens created by the displacement of ether, in my opinion, of the electromagnetic, relationships of all the energy that create this plasma ball that is Earth with the big, nice, crusty surface on the outside. But all we're doing is we're looking at it through a lens that has been displaced by the Earth, giving the false illusion of alignment of energy from space. And that might blow your mind a little bit if you're not a physicist, but the idea is imagine you go to those carnivals and you look at the mirrors, right? You know that they're going to have mirrors that make you look fat, look skinny, make you look all wiggly and cartoony. Well, imagine that exact same sort of lens. You understand that. You understand that the mirror's bent and it's grouping light in ways that make you look fat or thin, right? Well, imagine the gravitational force of Earth being a ball, throwing out a massive, electron cloud, which is the Van Allen belts. Another centripetal thing is happening at the equator. And so everything all the light that's trying to come into the observable instruments on planet Earth, okay, is getting lensed into this container. And they've put satellites in space to look at this stuff as well, but the satellites keep coming back with this lens effect that everything looks aligned to the planet Earth, which looks like we don't move. I think it's just an illusion based on the emissions of Earth curving and grouping the energy into this visible alignment. I don't think it's aligned to Earth. Okay, it's just my hunch. But I can't believe how many physicists I saw in a special on the internet, very serious documentary about the Michelson experiment, where no one could figure out and no one could theorize how the stuff was being aligned to Earth. Now, hopefully you have a fairly decent understanding of CERN, what it is, and how it's been put together. Again, it's made out of 4,000 left brain scientists who are extremely clever, extremely brilliant. The machine itself is a testament to mankind's ingenuity on a level that's just to be observed and marveled at, because what they've been able to do with these 5-story high gigantic sensors is just mind-blowing. Regardless if they find anything with this thing, it's an incredible accomplishment. But we also need to give them time, 10, 20, 30, 40 years to figure out what the hell they're doing with this machine. It's like creating Photoshop in the 50s, and they could, only a few people can conceive of Photoshop in 1955, and you're going to deploy it to the masses, and the masses are going to say, do something interesting with it. And we're like, hey, we just made this, chill out. Give me 5-10 years to master this new tool. So CERN has barely been in existence long enough to be mastered, right? Now let's get into some of the conspiracies on this thing. Some of them, I believe, are pretty warranted, but I'll tell you what, the number one reason why I think CERN for me is questionable, the Collider, the LHC, is that I don't believe that the smartest people on planet Earth believe for a split second that the Big Bang and dark matter have anything to do with the reality of the fabric of the universe. I could be wrong. They could have hive mined this lunacy together and carried it forward. But it seems unlikely that people with the intellectual capacity to build the biggest machine on planet Earth, and quite frankly, the most complicated machine on planet Earth, would still hang on to it and have such a closed mind as to not fathom that they might be completely and utterly wrong about the universe, right? When you're not in physics, you hear things and you just have to take it at face value, or you don't take it at face value. You're religious and you say, screw all that science, or you're a scientist and you go, oh yeah, well, that's the Big Bang, of course, right? When they had to deal with the fact that the redshift made it look like everything was traveling away from the Earth, and they wanted to keep their Big Bang theory, because, again, we observe every body in space, and everything's moving away from the Earth. If you just look at the redshift, and redshift is how we figure out whether or not something's going away from us or close to us. If it's got a blue shift that's coming at us, redshift is going away. That's how the theory works anyway. The analogy they came up with to solve for this, everything's moving away from Earth, and we're not at the center of the universe, which, again, I think it doesn't make any sense. Even if there's a God making us and we're super duper special and all this stuff, we don't need to be at the center of the frickin' universe to be special, for God's sakes. That's stupid man creating a stupid analogy, a visual model of the universe that just takes it to a level of crazy, right? But the patch from the physics side of things, the cosmology side of things, was ridiculous, right? They had this idea where they said, take a balloon and paint all the star and all the celestial bodies in the universe on the outside of this balloon, and then put it in your mouth and blow it up. And you can put Earth on any one of those points in space, on the outside of this balloon. As the balloon blows up, you know that everything relative to everything else is all going to have a redshift. And so the idea, it came and went really, really fast. It was interesting. But there was the idea that we're on the outside of a sphere, and the sphere itself is growing. And that's why no matter where you are in the universe, you're going to see everything going away from you. Weird, right? It couldn't be an anomaly in the idea of redshifts not being the most accurate way to figure out whether or not something's coming or going, right? But when you can't prove anything, when you can't travel the stars and prove anything, then you can hang on to these arbitrary models of how the universe works. I don't know what's real. I'm going to say that we need to, again, like my unknown episode, the unknown episode. It's all about accepting a discipline of science that lives within the unknown. And if you watch that episode, just back in the 40s somewhere, what I'm suggesting is instead of building CERN with a bunch of biased physicists coming in and saying, instead of saying this, well, we're going to see if the Big Bang has any merit based on what we see. We're going to see if dark matter has any merit based on what we see. But we're not going to be heartbroken and crying in our beers at night if it doesn't come out. What we really want to know is just what the hell is there. Just show us, reveal it to us, It's like the absurdity of the definitions of heaven. Man wants heaven to be clouds and pearly gates. If heaven existed, I'm going to tell you right now, the last person on planet Earth that I want to define heaven is a man, right? I don't want man to have anything to do with the architecture of heaven, right? We've seen what man does with the architecture of planet Earth and the societies that we have. Man is the last person to define bliss and utopia. So let's not let man define the principles of physics and how the universe is put together. Let's let man be a receiver of an outside truth that simply exists, whether or not man can conceive of it or not, right? At CERN LHC, there is a gigantic statue of this god Shiva. The goddess Shiva is known for being a god of chaos, a god of destruction under some definitions, right? And so that freaks people out right away. Now, if you take it just as a symbol that they're going to be colliding two protons together and destroying them in order to see what the universe is made out of, this metaphor of destruction could simply just be we needed the idea, something romantic as well, right? Because when you pick names for things, very few companies, if they don't pick the name of the founders or some object like an apple, they try to go for interesting things in history. So reaching back into lore to figure out some symbolic symbol of what they're trying to do, hey, you don't need to piss yourself because it's Shiva. Maybe it is something really intense and really dark. We're going to go through some of those theories as well. Okay? But the logo of this Hadron Collider is, if you look at it in a particular way, is undeniably 3 sixes put together. Now, you also have to look at the design of CERN, right, of the collider itself. You have 3 orbits these things have to migrate up through to get to the velocity of collision. So you have a small loop, a medium loop, and the massive loop, the 17-mile round loop. So in that, you're going to have a chamber that it's fired into, and it circles. That's a 6. It's going to go into the next one, which is another 6. And you're going into the top one, it's another 6, right? 3 sixes matter to one group of people on planet Earth and not 2. The Christians. The Christians in their made-up belief system have taken this demonic number of 6, which has been given to the devil, and 3 of them, it's the mark of the beast, right? Your Revelations passages in the New Testament. That's where it comes from. You didn't see Jesus talking about 3 sixes, and I think if it was important to mankind to know about what was wrong, even the fictitious story writers of this fictitious story would have put in the 3 sixes in that story, but they didn't. So that is one of the first alarming pieces there. Now, I'm going to tell you, in my own personal belief system, we know for a fact that there are people in high places that worship really dark stuff. We just do. And if nothing else, we can see that there are, churches of Satan that are funded at amazing levels. I mean, there's more churches of Satan going up right now than Catholic churches, because Catholic Church doesn't build that much anymore, right? They have massive churches that are largely empty, so why build any more, right? So people are building massive buildings and earmarking them over to Satan. So we know that someone's got some money and someone worships this chaotic nature. of belief system. The devil doesn't have to be real in the mythical sense of the devil as Christianity and other religions have prophesied. But you'll be surprised that a lot of religions have no devil. Like Buddhism doesn't worship a devil. Most Native American religions have no form of devil. You know, I wrote a screenplay. My first screenplay was about a Native American devil. And man, I had to search in the Stanford libraries for months to find one tribe on planet Earth that believed in a devil. And it wasn't the traditional devil that we believe in as Christians, right? I'm not a Christian, but I used to be. But it's not as cut and dry for most sects of humanity, right? For Muslims, it's everyone else that isn't a Muslim, right? So it's not that someone couldn't create a big machine to do something ulterior with the bizarre belief system and a symbolic devil. So I'm not going to take that away from you. But what I have found that just hurts my soul is that the people that are pushing forward all of this ulterior, demonic, nefarious intent of the collider are a very small group of Christians. Now, again, like I said, you have scientists and physicists and cosmologists that have come out and said the biggest scare is that they are toying with this subatomic matter at a massive scale. And so, you know, there were theories that they would create mini black holes. And, you know, again, CERN itself, the CERN organization, has essentially admitted that they might end up making a goal of the collider to create these mini black holes. You know, of course, the tests in 2015 haven't been released in any way that's blowing everyone's mind just yet, right? They're smashing stuff together, I believe, at the high velocity now for the first time. And there were a lot of problems with CERN when it was first created. I shouldn't say a lot, but I think in 2005, a guy fell off a high place and died. You know, when you look at the videos and the pictures of CERN Collider, a 5-story high collision sensor inside of probably what must be a 6 or 7-story tunnel, you know, just falling off of a scaffolding. It just looks horrifying. I mean, you're talking about getting splattered on the ground easily, right? So the fact that only one person's died in the open press is phenomenal accomplishment to have 10,000 people. Remember Hoover Dam. Hoover Dam has dozens and dozens of workers in the cement right now. When they x-ray the cement, plenty of people were, as soon as you fell into the cement and got covered up, they knew you were dead because of the impact of the fall, and fishing out your body was going to cost too much. So they just paved over you. I don't know. There's some numbers about how many people are stuck in the Hoover Dam skeletons. One day we might tear that thing down and pull them out, but right now they're stuck inside the dam. So they did an amazing job only having one guy die in the press in 2005. Now, before they turned it on, they had in 2007, like a magnet support broke. And so they didn't realize a lot of the torque and the energy that turning this thing on was going to actually create. And so they had to go retrofit a bunch of magnets to hold into place. And right after they turned it on, and they did what's called first beam in 2008, it wasn't a collision. They just wanted to see stuff go around in one direction and stuff go around in the other direction. They did this first beam, and they had this gigantic celebration with champagne, and everybody got crazy. But within 10 days, the thing had a massive catastrophic failure, which is the, I don't know exactly what happened, but the liquid helium started to torque even further than these support problems. It was more of the innate design of the actual magnets themselves, and a big leak occurred. And it was frightening how, when they did the video of these big magnet segments, you know, these big tubes that are all cooled down. It takes forever to cool them down and forever to heat them back up. And so in order to fix them, it took days to heat them back up so they could get inside and look around and start disassembling them, right? I think they had to fix like 20 segments of this thing. And the steel is just torqued and ripped. I mean, and some of it carbonized and burned up. I mean, it was much more intense than I think I realized in the press when I finally started researching the damage of this thing. So in 2008, there was a huge retrofit on this thing, right? A fix. And I think in 2009, there was like a vacuum leak or something, really something minor. But so they keep turning this thing on and figuring out something else about the machine. And again, it's astonishing no matter how you look at it, right? But now, because the collider actually had in its atlas censor this footnote of we're looking for brand new physics and we're looking for extra dimensions, okay, people started freaking out. Now, I'm going to say that I've done a huge analysis on all of the theories of what CERN is doing, the collider is doing, that is being pointed at a nefarious, almost exclusively Christian biblical intent on this thing. And again, if you take, let's just say the world had 8 billion people and only a billion are Christians, then 7 billion people wouldn't understand the conspiracies that are put on the Hadron Collider, because they don't have this fear-mongering paradigm of Christianity, of heaven and hell, of Satan and God, of Satan and Jesus, and angels coming down from on high. Okay? Once you free yourself from that ridiculous post-Roman Empire control apparatus, right? Remember, just to recap, the Romans were losing control over their entire empire. They were about to collapse at the time of Christ. And this story of Christ was resurrected out of 13 previous stories of Christ, sort of like, virgin birth, Savior comes down and saves the world. They just repackaged that thing up and said, you're not taxing yourself because Caesar says so. You're taxing yourself because God wants 10%. And we're gonna run around and kind of create a bunch of crusades to pound this new idea into the lexicon of man, to the brain trust of man. And for those of you who are visibly on the side of Rome, but you don't tend to believe in this crazy story we've just invented, which most of these people had stories of like this in their past. Ireland had Cuchulainn, which was a Christ-like figure, in their homes worshiping it, right? When Jesus came around, they said, you're copying our guy. A bunch of other people said, you're copying our dude. They did the Inquisition to pound it in everyone's mind, torturing them if they didn't believe. And that catalyzed the thought into new generations. Right now we have socialism as the new indoctrination of the young kids, because they're going to grow up and work for the government, and it'll be Brazil all over again, right? Or Orwell's or 1984 eventually, or Huxley's Brave New World after that. Now you might have your non-Christians worried about interdimensional communication when it comes to aliens. Your Christians are usurping the whole thing and making it angels. Well, what's going on is that you have conspiracy folks, and, more power to them. You can do whatever you want with your life. I'm not going to do it personally. But they have supposedly these phantom sources coming to them within the bowels of the Collider project, because there's thousands of scientists. Some of them have claimed to have named themselves, and they've written these fanciful novels. And if I was a nerd working for the Collider and I heard about a bunch of theories coming out about what I was doing, and I was in full understanding of what was going on, I might have some fun too if I were them. Remember, these guys are extremely talented, right? You might have a concert pianist, beautiful painters, writers, all kinds of stuff that they could write a story that would be really compelling, and they could use plenty of truths to add to their fictional story to make you believe something. So you have a bunch of conspiracy videos online with hundreds of thousands of views on them, where people have said, I've got an exclusive source within the CERN project of the Collider, and they're telling me that we found aliens. They're telling me that we did open a rift. They're telling me all this kind of stuff. Some of them even have pictures. And I saw this video, God bless the guy. He had almost 500,000 views on the most ludicrous thing I've ever seen in my life, right? Maybe not the most ludicrous thing, but he had the typical blip pictures that they show when CERN, when the Collider group actually takes a photograph of the collision itself. There's an emission of photons off the collision, and so they take a photograph of that digitally, and then they put it on a bunch of monitors so the press can see this little white blip go book. And it's the data that comes off of that impact that is actually the only thing of any value, right? The white blip's a white blip. But this guy took a photograph. Someone supposedly sent him a photograph. Okay, this comes out of thin air. These guys don't do any research. They can't confirm who these individuals are. They even encourage people, hey, if you can anonymously send me stuff, do it, and we'll never expose you, right? And so imagine the validity of this data, right? But they sent him a picture of two blips. One was small, one was big. And the guy ends up zooming in it on Photoshop. And of course, these chaotic, grainy shots, if you take a picture, take enough of them or create enough of them in Photoshop by perhaps using a nice gradient in Photoshop, or even doing some sort of organic light in your office, with a little pen light or something, you take photographs and you knock down the contrast, and then you save it out as bad JPEG compressions, which is doing, CMYK, light wave guessing. You get these artifacts, and then eventually you bang out one of these photographs, and if you look really hard and you put a bunch of thought process on it, you start seeing demon faces and alien faces. And this is what this guy did. He says, oh man, it's total proof that they opened up a gateway and it showed a demon's face, right? Which kind of looked like a little almond-eyed alien. And then he tries to say it's Shiva's face. Unbelievable that people are getting all bent out of shape about this. For those of you who've stared at clouds, you've found faces. For those of you who've looked at 9/11, the clouds coming out of the World Trade Centers, eventually you stare at chaos enough and you can find something in it. For those of you who have plaster walls in your house where they've actually done the spray plaster wall, it used to be a big thing when I was a kid. Man, you could see faces in the wall, faces in popcorn ceilings. Chaos will eventually create something that's relative to a face. What do we need to make a face shape in chaos? Two dots close to each other that would represent an eye, with down below another dot that might represent a mouth, and you've got a face. So 3 chaotic dots in full chaos is going to create a face, and no matter what you look at. And this is what's catalyzing this whole thing, that somehow they've actually got physical proof that we've opened up a gateway and these demons are coming through. Utterly absurd. Okay? I'm not trying to give these guys a free pass. I'm just saying, remember I talked about at the very beginning of this episode, the snake eating its own tail. Well, the head might be genius and the tail might be insanity. Okay? So your head might be the genius of a bunch of biased scientists coming in trying to prove old dogma, and the tail might just be the Christianity insanity of fictional stories being perpetrated as fact. Okay, we got to let go of this crap if we're ever truly going to find out what the universe is made out of. The scientists need to back off their dogma and just look at the data that comes through the machine and say, this is what we saw come out of a collision. No bias until we see the chaos and we try to make sense out of it instead of coming in and, again, cherry-picking the data, right? For those of you who know how polls work in the world, right? When a particular group wants to convince you that everyone believes like they do, they run a poll. And what do? They take a sampling of people that are likely to believe what they believe anyway. And anything that doesn't correlate with what their outcome needs to be, they simply just shave that part of the poll off, or they create another poll which knocks that group of data out of the visible spectrum of opinion. And you can do this scientifically with energy and mass in a sensor. Just simply say, we're not looking at that. Instead of saying we're looking at everything we can possibly do, and have we done our job, all right, to find every single frequency that's coming out of these collisions. This is what we have to be careful about with these ridiculous theories. I'm saying ridiculous. That's my opinion. But I think that we're getting all bent out of shape because we want to be excited, right? Once you're excited about being murdered by a demon, you get a little dump of dopamine and adrenaline in your system. And just so you know, that's exactly what happens when you ride a roller coaster. That's exactly what happens when some people who are into drama create drama in their life. They're getting chemically addicted to a bunch of things occurring in their mind. So when you get yourself all excited and you think the end of the world's going to happen, some people want that to happen because they don't like their lives, and they think, well, if Jesus just comes out of the sky and saves me, then things are going to be great. It's like the Alien Promise episode, right? When people think about this collider and they want to superimpose on top of it without scientific backgrounds, the idea of opening up a portal, a lot of the illustrations I've seen online have to do with the disk itself, the circle that is the path of these protons. And in their brain, they draw a door because they have the Shiva statue out front, right? They've got this goddess in the center of a disk. And so in their brain, that's a metaphor for this circle. Once you accelerate mass to a certain velocity, right? Just creating an electromagnetic wave going in opposite directions, okay, until they collide with each other within this disk. That is enough to just open a door to another dimension. And it's going to be a 17-mile-around door. I don't know what the diameter of that is offhand, but that would be the size of the door. And then all of a sudden, all this demonic stuff comes out. Well, let's think about it. Why does it always have to be dark? Even if you're going to go with your theory. Let's say I go down your line of theory. They're going to create this door between another universe. Why does it have to come from the bowels of the most idiotic explanation of how the God would make the universe, right? If you're a Christian, you believe God's out there to protect you and keep you in place. But if you're also a Christian, you got to believe that God created the devil and God keeps the devil going. So you want to blame the devil for anything? Well, blame God, because in your world, he created, oh, but no, he's a fallen angel. He's disobeying God. No. That means that God in your brain doesn't have complete control over everything in his domain. I think at a basic sense, God has complete control over his domain. If you're going to go with your Christian model of the universe, right? The scientists are all rolling their eyes at this point. But what I'm trying to do is peel off a bunch of the ill intent that's being superimposed on these scientists. My concern's more of the concerns of people like Stephen Hawking to say, look, you guys are fiddling with the fundamentals of the universe. And when I think that man may have built a machine to do something that the organic universe doesn't do naturally, that's when it concerns me. If I feel like the collider is merely doing something that occurs every once in a while in space, then I'm fine. And I think, quite frankly, right now, as it's been communicated to us, the CERN Collider has not created a single experiment yet that doesn't occur in the natural universe, right? We have to create this machine to make two protons slam into each other head on. And we have to create this machine so that we can sense the energies that come off that collision so that we can find other subatomic particles of the universe. But what would stop two photons in the surface of the sun, for God's sakes, from slamming into each other at really extreme paces, extreme velocities? Are we saying that that doesn't happen in the universe? Why would we say that? It's an infinitesimal amount of light even inside the collider itself, so you wouldn't see it in space. Now you might say, okay, well, what if they create a black hole? All right, well, let's talk about black holes too, because it's another one of these Big Bang theories that's been deprecated in the late 80s, early 90s, and miraculously resurrected like in the last 10 years. For those of you who haven't studied black holes, okay, here's the theory. And it was theorized in the 1700s, for God's sake, and it was essentially when they figured out that gravity existed and that a wave of light existed or a Newtonian particle of light existed, depending on where you came in on the theory. They said, what if something was so heavy that as the photon tried to exit the mass of this object, it couldn't do it. It actually got sucked back into the bowels of this object, such that when you looked at it, the human eye, which sees very little spectrum of light, okay, can't see anything in that spot, and that's where it eventually got its name black hole in the 20th century, right? But it's a theoretical thing on paper, and it was alluring forever. And when you looked at the theories of black holes in, say, 1980, the amount of interpretations of what this thing would be was really fascinating. I mean, it was like one of them was a conical hole that went down into an Einstein-Rosen bridge, which went to another universe. The other one, it became a ball. The other one became a disk. And then it became, in the late 80s, early 90s, it became a disk with sort of a dispersion point in the center, such that when a black hole were to get to the event horizon moment where it starts to grab light and make itself dark, at the same exact point it's achieved this phenomenal level of density, which again, it's like, I believe the theories the initial ones can only create himself with like mass, 4 times the mass of our sun, up to about, I think, something like 10 or 12 mass of our sun. Anything over that, it continues to explode, never gets small. Anything under that, it turns into like a brown dwarf, because it never can quite compress down hard enough to keep light from escaping. It just becomes this really dense sphere, right? But the idea was that you could create them between the spectrum of like 4 and 12, somewhere in there, and then you could put a couple of them together. But what they finally figured out was, on paper, they could easily prove this, is that it dissipates All of its mass that it's gathered in a vertical and like a North Pole, South Pole cone, where it ejects out these huge heavy elements. Like, I believe it was, last time I read it was like helium-23 or something like that, gets potentially crushed at the center of a black hole. Okay, these things were completely deprecated out of existence. And again, when we needed something romantic to explain something, boy, they came back with a vengeance. And now I've got friends of mine with, I would say, a total lack of knowledge in physics, but a really kind of remedial surface. I read a book and therefore I know everything kind of thing. They're saying, oh yeah, they're at the center of galaxies. You know, again, out of sight, out of mind is the absolute titillating moment for a theoretical physicist, because they can tell you what's there and you can't prove it, and they can get a PhD in the meantime. And again, if you look at my episode on the unknown, there might be a way to formalize theoretical physics in a way that we can award degrees, but not say that this stuff is actually real, right? Stephen W. Hawking's Big Bang Theory, we now believe, with open minds and just some plain logic, the Big Bang's been completely deprecated out of potentially existing for those of us with open minds, right? But the guy still gets to keep his PhD, which was based on the theory. So what he got was a theoretical theory for the unknown at the time that he did it. Hands down, great exercise. But once we deprecate that, it's, no one's going to strip Newton of his genius for coming up with particle physics, right? The idea that a photon's a particle. No one's going back and saying Newton was a moron because he wasn't right. Now, we don't have to say Hawking's not smart because his theory was deprecated, but we shouldn't build gigantic colliders with a bunch of brainwashed scientists going in with these biases, because they're never going to find what's really there if they can't open their mind. Now, there was a musical called Symmetry, created by those who oversaw the CERN project, the CERN Collider project. Once you start looking into the DNA and the backgrounds of the scientists who actually created the collider, you have something, I think, pretty wonderful. You have people who, again, in their small collective circles of probably the average Joe, they stand out like a sore thumb as a nerd. What turns them on doesn't turn on society in most cases. Nothing wrong with that. It's how we have smart people in the world, right? But what ends up happening is that they actually have massive skills in a lot of ways, and perhaps they don't have the social skills to really become the musician with their own album. They don't have the maybe social ability to get themselves inside of more artistic things that they do. I've seen videos of one of the CERN scientists doing this crazy, really white rap at a party. She was doing a rap about the collider, and it was brilliant. It was utterly brilliant. The lyrics worked out well. It was very, white people beats. Every time a white person tries to imitate rap, if they're not raised in the urban areas where they actually understand it, it has a certain cadence to it, which is really goofy. But it was brilliant, right? So I looked at this production that they did, which seemed to have a stage play within, or a dance. I don't even know what the hell you call it. It was like some sort of ballet, musical, jazz thing inside the collider. So they filmed some people inside the collider. Then they filmed some stuff live action, like in a desert, or like it was like a snow-capped area. I don't mean to say desert. Sorry. There may have been a desert thing too, but it made this crazy weird thing, which was really paying homage to, I forgot, it's, CERN is a god in himself. It's like this not goat head, it's like a deer-headed god out of, I think it's Irish lore. Some of you are going to scream out the name. I'll put it on the caption here. But, and Shiva and the whole thing, and it was really sort of a disturbing homage to all the symbology of perhaps a real chaotic universe and a real chaotic worship of perhaps darker forces. One could interpret it that way, right? If you want to see it, it's real easy to see. Just look up on YouTube CERN Symmetry. And you're going to see the poster of it, which is actually interesting because I've seen a lot of conspiracy sites talk about it, and what they haven't figured out was when you take the cross-section of the collider sensors, it looks like an eyeball. Literally, the coils that measure all of the voltages, I guess, or power the thing on the caps of the actual collider because of the sensors, right? There's like caps on the end, all these crazy sensors in between. It looks like the iris of an eye. All the woven parts that give us our eyeballs colors. It kind of looks like that, but no one seemed to pick up on that. And we know that there's a huge worship of eyes in the world, Those are the enlightened ones that can see all things, right? So you might have, again, to lend credibility to those who are worried about what CERN Collider is supposed to be doing, my concern goes like this. I don't believe for a second that the smartest people on Earth actually believe in the Big Bang, actually believe in black holes, actually believe in dark matter, as it's been classified to button up the Big Bang Theory. Now, those who are looking for supersymmetry and multiverse particles, they don't have to see anything about necessarily the Big Bang to look for what they're looking for and find it. They have superimposed on top of those objects their use in the universe as it relates to those other theories, or relates to those other theories. But I think that we should just look at what the universe is made of and stop trying to make it have these romanticized stories that make your grandma feel good. So you bring together a band of people who are extremely scientific, meaning they get off on researching things. That's how they get into it. And they're left-brainers, so they memorize and repeat constantly new things. Well, I bet a bunch of them role play. I bet a bunch of them play fantasy video games. I bet a bunch of them have read the Iliad. They've studied all ancient history, trying to figure out, how the pyramids were made and that sort of thing. And I'm willing to bet that they understand some of the more romanticized symbolic worships of these gods that these things have been named after. And there's, you can make yourself feel important in two ways. There's multiple ways of doing it, but there's two big categories of how to make yourself feel important, especially when you're a nerd. And there are gangster nerds as well. You can make yourself feel important by being really, really smart about things that people don't understand. And you can make yourself feel important because you have developed a method of making yourself a threat to everyone else on planet Earth. Right? Your gangster guy who's born with massive genes. He's 6'5". He's just built no matter what he eats, no matter what he does. He's just got massive muscles. Inside, he's a terrified little boy for whatever reason. So he goes off and gets a bunch of tattoos. There's these guys who steal valor and pretend to be Navy SEALs because they want everyone to fear them at the bar or in the biker gang that they're in, right? There could be a small group of people in the world that because they can't find an internal way to feel valuable to themselves, they try to draw it from society through these other methods of either being really, really intelligent or being really formidable, threatening to the rest of society. Or maybe they're both. And so you have this collider, and believe me, the 4,000 scientists that are involved with this collider understand, without the shadow of a doubt, that less than 1% of the world knows what the hell they're doing. Just at sheer value, even if they're trying to find ice cream out of the universe, that just soft serve anywhere you are on planet Earth or the universe, even if that was their objective, they understand that no one understands the machine that's going to find this reality out. And so they become sort of this scary group of people because no one understands what the hell they're doing. But of all of the conspiracies that I've heard about demons popping out of this thing, which again is a completely biased Christian construct that we just need to let go, right? The idea that because there's another universe it has to be evil, it should just ring as absolutely ignorant of mankind. Why are we racist in this universe? Because we fear people that aren't like us. Why are aliens always portrayed in movies as being these space troopers or whatever the hell, it was like these movies where they always come down as bugs, or the Planet X theory, they're going to come make us slaves. Arthur C. Clarke was probably one of the only guys that actually portrayed them as intelligent beings trying to help us out a little bit, to not give us all the answers, but to ebb us forward with these monoliths to kind of get us to the next form of thought. First making us eat red meat to increase our visual cortex and our brain capacity, and then to figure out how to defend ourselves with a bone weapon, Now, the inherent problem with CERN Collider, I believe we've already touched on, but I want to put a fine point on it. And that is that they are toying with the fabric of the universe within this machine. Two photons mashing into each other and studying the effects of that. I'm going to guess somewhere in the universe, through gravity wells or whatever, that this sort of thing happens. Now, maybe photons don't accelerate to the speed of light very often and slam into another photon. But I'm willing to bet at the center of any massive object in space that this kind of stuff occurs. Maybe even 10 times, if not a million times, if not infinitely more powerful than two photons hitting each other at the speed of light. And we don't lose the universe. We don't see pockets of the universe disappear. We don't see big giant black spots in the sky, at night, where all these stars somehow got sucked into something. If there was all these black holes in space, as again, pitched as this sort of romantic novel of, hey, be afraid of everything in space, right? Don't ever try to travel the stars because you might get sucked into a black hole. Well, that's going to make a huge segment of the population never want anyone to go into space. They're not going to want an accelerator that could possibly create one. But again, they talk about creating a mini black hole at these collision points. Okay. Again, what's the definition of a black hole? It's black because photons can't escape. All right. When you study black holes, like I said, they say that the smallest black hole, I think, starts at a 4 times the sun, 4 times the mass of a theoretical sun out there, 93 million miles away, right? Well, where are they going to get that kind of mass within the collider itself? Maybe they're simply talking about some sort of collision where photons get sucked into the collision itself for a split second. The idea that this is going to manifest some gravity well, I think, is absurd. But I think that the gravity well black hole theory is based on this really bunk idea of gravity, which is mass exchanging particles between each other, and not the ethereal winds pushing things together. As long as the ethereal winds, which again were completely proven to exist, but then deprecated out of by physicists that found it troublesome to deal with that theory within their models, right? Then there's never going to be a black hole in any form in a lighter in a lesser form of mass than 4 times this part of our sun. That's just where the physics starts to make a black hole. So I think we're safe there. But the idea that opening up a dimension to another universe is exclusively a negative thing is something I think we need to let go of. The aperture of the door for this thing would be infinitely small, the order of magnitude of a photon. Or of a proton, Right? So the other theory that's out there is antimatter. Again, I think this is largely baseless, but there are schematics within the project of CERN Collider to study potential signs of antimatter. For me, again, antimatter is largely a theoretical construct in physics, right? It works out on paper. Again, the first time I ever heard about antimatter was at the event horizon of a black hole, and that the torment on mass at the event horizon starts to create these antimatter particles. And because theoretically, when you tap into the energy of antimatter, you typically have sort of an infinite amount of mass, or infinite amount of energy that can be expelled out of these particles. It's alluring that we could create a power system out of them and that sort of thing. There are conspiracy theories online that talk about CERN having created antimatter already. And one of the theories was one of the stories was that they stored it at a local university somewhere in either Switzerland or France. And that all of the crime rate in that university went up. That somehow antimatter simply existing near human beings scrambled via chaotic theory the consciousness of humans. And so the order that we have as civilized beings simply deteriorated slowly. The longer that the antimatter was at the university, people went crazy and started raping each other and killing each other, right? I think we would have heard about this somewhere in the national press. And I don't trust the national press as far as I can throw it, right? But I'm thinking, so the theory was that the university told CERN, get this stuff off of our premise because it's starting to cause a bunch of problems. Now, for anybody who studies antimatter, probably one of the first theories that comes into play is trying to contain antimatter, if you ever found it or created it, is infinitely impossible. But there's theories that CERN is now going to be able to create antimatter in ounces, if not pounds, on a daily basis. And that somehow those who run the world are going to distribute this stuff all over the surface of Earth to usher in this era of chaos and disorder, right? If any of you have studied, military organizations that create viruses and bioweapons, they never create anything that they don't have an antidote to. The second they create a lethal something, they don't have an antidote to it, they typically destroy it because they'll give themselves a little bit of time to create the antidote to it, but once they figure out it can't be created, so probably some get quarantined, but most of them get destroyed because the people that run the world don't want to have something that gets loose and they can't stop it themselves. They can't take a shot, a pill, some sort of treatment to solve it, right? And I think a bunch of antimatter around Earth would be probably the single most dangerous thing that man could do. Okay? But now let's get into, while we shut this thing down, let's study for 1 second the psyche of some of these kids and adults. Now, some of these scientists have beautiful families, beautiful husbands and wives, and beautiful kids, and they have something to live for that they wouldn't dare risk the health of the earth. And then you have some scientists that have been utterly persecuted their entire lives for being what they are. Whether or not I think when they get to CERN, they feel fantastic because they're surrounded by the Mensa intellect that is their upper thinking frequencies, right? So they're probably really at home in these groups of people. But imagine you hive mind a few folks together that are really jaded against society. Because again, we don't treat people properly on this planet. And the second that they feel like we have that insecurity of their intelligence over ours, we tend to eject them out of our lives. I see this all the time in my own personal circles, right? What if you manifest the animosity towards society within a bunch of scientists who could potentially create really lethal situations on Earth? So outside of all the nutty conspiracies that are out there, you might actually have a group of people, a small group of people, they either are in the 4,000 scientists that we know about that are certified in and out of the group, with their badges that let them down into certain levels of the CERN Collider. Or you might have some people hovering over the organization that are perhaps the master engineers of the whole thing. Out of all of these CERN documentaries that I've seen and paperwork that I've read, what I haven't seen to date are the scientists that are lined up and the documentary said, this guy or this girl invented that thing. That I have not seen. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I just haven't seen it in my research. I've watched documentaries that are official story stuff on Netflix, ones that have been broadcast that are re-uploaded to YouTube, and I haven't seen the master engineers that are credited with creating this thing. And that bothers me a little bit. So if you guys have that video, please link it down below so I can see it. You read the Wikipedia pages and all this stuff, and you don't see certain scientists put in the forefront of creating the machine, of inventing it. And as long as you don't have those individuals, and you can't have videotaped, transcribed interviews with those individuals, then perhaps what this machine does isn't completely revealed at all. And again, because in most things in the world, we have a kind of a BS story on the top about what someone's doing with the particular like the Manhattan Project, completely hidden out of sight. People working on the project don't actually have all of the know-how of what they're trying to do, creating plutonium to create the atom bomb, right? This could be one of those sort of things. So there is a bit of, I think, transparency that is not occurred in the standard documentaries. What the documentaries do is show you the heads of state, who are the project managers that manage the various operations of the facility, the groups that take care of repairs when all these mistakes happen, groups that handle the actual firing of the actual collision itself. You don't see the brains behind the whole thing. Isn't there someone that is the master brain power behind the whole thing? One head of state that campaigned this thing to CERN to get it built in the first place? I don't know who those people are. I'm assuming you can provide me with that information. Is this the best use of our time? Well, as the senators in Texas debated, they said no. We've got a lot more problems on planet Earth, and we should be focusing on those. For me, I'm definitely willing to cut a blank check to scientists that are off trying to figure out how this thing's put together. It is something that fascinates me, and it's fascinated me since I was a kid. As soon as I got into physics and realized that no one really understood gravity, man, it was just like the thorn in my side. I had to figure out how it worked. And I didn't realize that 100 years before I was born, they completely figured out how it worked. And when you see the cabal against people like Tesla, you start to realize that the world isn't what you think it is, you know? The fact that a child can go all the way through high school, and unless they have a really cool science teacher, which is off the beat of Common Core in America, you never hear about Tesla. When all the electricity that's running your world, all the wireless transmissions that you see in the world is all his invention. Unbelievable we don't teach this kind of stuff. But somebody at the top knows about that guy. All big scientists in the world definitely learn about Tesla, and they go deep down the rabbit hole of Tesla. And I think, again, Eric Dollard has done a beautiful job resurrecting everybody from Faraday to Steinmetz, and really showed on paper the sort of certifiable proof that when physicists came into the picture, they tried to erase all of our knowledge about electromagnetism, which is at the very core of the CERN project, in order to figure out all this stuff, right? So CERN is a big subject, and it's going to continue colliding stuff, and we're going to continue to get new data in. But when you hear about these theories of CERN being evil, I just want you to tell yourself, one, is it something that only the Christian factions on Earth would believe in, right? Demons and angels coming through. Is it something that is UFO-based? Is it aliens coming in? And then I want you to ask yourself, why on earth would all this interdimensional communication always be, one, fully sentient, right? It's like, full of bodies and spirits come out of this dimensional hole and take over Earth, right? One only has to study the story of Faust for 5 seconds to realize that if you do a deal with the devil, as it's proverbially defined, right, you lose. If you see, Ghostbusters 2, where they're bringing out this Cthulhu guy from some other dimension, the guy that brought him out said, hey, I've brought you into this world, I've served you, and a guy kills him right there on the spot. Do you think the smartest people on the planet that could create some interdimensional door wouldn't know that little parable of how it actually works? And if you take it to the full Christian hell and damnation thing, well, they're talking about these individuals opening up the door, letting hell through, and then being put in hell for the rest of their natural born lives. There's no serving at the right hand of the devil. No such thing. I'm sure he's got his posse if he exists already, but he's held together by God. So it's all one ancestral loop. It doesn't make any sense on paper, let alone in a bunch of conspiracy videos. But a bunch of guys are creating these videos, and they're just wringing you out like a dirty old cloth of gullibility. Is it stupid to investigate this stuff? Absolutely not. But maybe it's just a little crazy to just jump right in after a video and believe it. But if you're strung out on Christianity, you're strung it out on this belief that God is this immature being. Go see my episode on God if you have any questions about how that works. To think about the frequency of reality that you're bringing into existence. This whole planet is strung out on terrorism. We are strung out on fear right now, more than we have in 1,000 years. Because of the internet, it is incubating this consciousness of lunacy. Most people in the 60s who dropped LSD, as I said in my LSD episode, we realized that once you see, like Larry Hagman said, if everybody on planet Earth dropped LSD, and they weren't in some torturous lifestyle, right? They didn't have a bunch of demons and skeletons in their closets, right? They would see the beauty of nature and peace that the universe should exist in. And we have this thing that CERN helped fund and create called the internet. And we should be able to use this mechanism, which is what I'm trying to do with the show, feebly so, right, is to incubate the consciousness of the whole world using the internet as a means of instantaneous communication of our thoughts, of our concepts, to think peacefully and to think wonderfully. And the truth movement's all about this, right? The truth movement's trying to expose all of the lies and deceit to then get us down to what reality is, good or bad, because the truth is the truth, whether or not you believe in it, right? And make this place a peaceful place. By running around with all this dogma from religions that preach that God's a wrathful, immature child, and that he's unleashed this thing called the devil on us, and he keeps the devil sustained to create choice, left and right choices, good and bad choices. We're putting ourselves in a very subatomic consciousness of utter fear-mongering, which is screwing with our brains. And we need to pop out of that. If there's a God, I'm sure that God is infinitely patient, completely agnostic to evil. He simply knows that he's made the universe a fair place, that anything can happen, and that's what fairness is. Fairness is an affirmative action over all things in the universe. We don't need a nirvanic state of heaven, which is by any definition hell, a solid state of lack of change. That's not heaven. That's a feeble man's attempt to escape the challenges of being alive. It is my hope that soon CERN can engage theories that have nothing to do with the Big Bang, dark matter, black holes, and get to just what you see. Just analyze what you see and reinterpret everything from a 0-point bias and reinvent things. The amount of documentaries I saw where these scientists were crying in their beer. I saw one old man say, I've been doing this for 40 years, and he goes, if this data comes out and proves me wrong, then I will have wasted 40 years of my life. I don't really classify it as 40 years of wasting your life, but I will say this, by hanging on to the dogma of ridiculous theories, by not being a right-brain thinker to being creative about things and getting out of what you were taught, maybe you did waste the majority of your life. Which is why you can't do that. Which is why we have to have unknown as a discipline within all disciplines of science. Going in with an empty mind and filling it up with what potentially might be there. As opposed to going in with these, I'm going to have my heart broken if what I thought of 20, 30 years ago doesn't come true. You know, I bust Stephen Hawking's balls all the time on this show. But I want to put a statement in before I close this episode off. I have a lot of admiration for that guy because he did the one thing that I've been talking about the whole time, which is he kicked his own ass throughout his whole life. He never stopped theorizing. He's still going, right? But he still deprecates his own research throughout his life. And that, for me, makes him one of the smartest people on planet Earth within the science community because he deprecates his own stuff. Now, Cambridge puts a lot of pressure on him to keep Cambridge accolades like the Big Bang going. I personally believe his book on black holes was a result of his previous book where he actually uttered in one sentence that he didn't think black holes existed anymore, that he didn't think it was a singularity. And the very next book he writes is all about how it was one, sort of. So that's where we need to be. We need to be open to truth no matter what we brought into the equation up to that point. We latch on to theories because we don't have a theory. We latch on to theories to fill the void. What do you think Christianity and all religions are? They're trying to fill a void of why we exist. They look into the infinite sky and their brain just implodes. And so in order to keep that implosion from happening, they come up with Big Bang theories or flat earth theories or religious theories to satiate this unknown. We have a problem with unknown. Well, count how much stuff we think you know about the universe and count how much stuff we think we don't know about the universe. We're outnumbered by the unknown. And if we don't feel comfortable in the unknown, if we don't develop a discipline of science that essentially saying the moment you put your foot down is the moment you've made the mistake, there has to be a chaotic method of studying the universe. And there are scientists that study chaos, and they've been trying to pioneer this for several decades now. But when you go up and read all the official papers on what the collider is all about, and you see Big Bang and dark matter everywhere, it just breaks the heart of an open mind. You know, it's okay to prove these things wrong or prove them right or that sort of thing. But these people, they get all bent out of shape because they might not be right. It's just nuts. What gives you the right to think that you're right? Why would you want to do that? You know, because you get an accolade somewhere, a degree, more funding for your paper. I understand the system's kind of corrupt against open minds, but What have we called the most brilliant people on planet Earth? The people with open minds that change the system. And that doesn't mean they're right? I think you feel me. So this is at least my first take on CERN. They're going to have to do a lot more research and results, and there's going to have to be more definitive stuff that comes out pointing at these darker theories for me to do another episode, but I might do one. But I wanted to really get to the point where we can get all on the same page of what this project is physically, what it's been theorized, the validity of all the anti-theories. I know I probably didn't go enough into the darkness for a lot of you guys, but when I really got into it and started studying all these crazy theories against CERN, it all just dovetailed into one broken group of people that are using fictitious religious stories to somehow put on top of science craziness. Why do you think the scientific community scoffs so badly at religion? Just go look at the conspiracies against CERN, and you'll find out why. That they're a little bit tired of it. Right? So, let's open our minds. Let's look at the data. Let's realize we don't know what the universe is made of, but we're trying to figure it out. For those of you who are scientists, please go into your research with no bias about anything. You've built a really gorgeous, amazing machine, and I personally salute you for doing that. But let's look at the data in a completely benign way. Just take it in and let it invent itself. And I know there's scientists who've been on camera who believe that's exactly what should be happening there. So to you folks, you're at the tip of the spear in terms of really finding out, I think, what the universe is made of using this machine. So you are our only hope at this point. For those of you who are really old, hanging on to your old theories, well, I'm sure we'll say nice things about you when you're all done with your career. You meant well. If you haven't already, go to mkultraradio.com for all the feeds. That's really all that this website's made for. So if you're coming through the audio, you can go see the video on YouTube. If you come to the video, but you'd like to listen to these in your car when you're traveling around, that's the way to get it. Again, iTunes only shows the last 9 episodes, and if you're using that on your iPhone or iPad or something like that, so you probably want to get a third-party MP3 listener to go ahead and scour the several episodes that we have. So, again, let's take care of ourselves. Let's take care of other folks. Let's keep open minds. And let's figure out how this universe is put together. I will see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.